From Tobago to New York to Accra and beyond, Jim reflects on a life lived across continents. In this episode, he shares stories of how his Trinidad and Tobagonian-ness stood out in unexpected ways, and how the colors, people, and movement of the world continue to find their way onto his canvas. A celebration of the global in the local, and the local in the global. You've studied and worked globally, you've done urban planning and design and so on. But I guess more the urban planning side of it, how has that sort of global exposure influenced your art?
Okay. Well, one of the things that I always did, whatever country I went to, was to first find other creative, whatever you were doing, for another artist. I always exhibited in different countries that I went to. I would find different things to paint, new things, to paint and so on. A lot of people ask me, for instance, about dance. You notice that a lot of my paintings, they're really about dancing, and that came about because the first time I landed in Africa, in Ghana, got up in the morning. I was doing research at the time, staying at the campus in Legon, in Accra. And I heard, when I got up in the morning, I heard drumming. And just for a split second, I thought I was in Tobago. And then I said, but no, I'm in Africa. Listening to drumming, it's the same sort of drumming I was hearing in Tobago. Next morning, drumming again. And I asked a friend of mine who was there, a Trinidadian actually, a fellow, Roy Watts, I don't know if you knew. Roy Watts, he was there at the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. And I said, Roy, I've been when I heard the drum. He said, where's that? I asked him, He said every day they dance at the campus. That was the creative, that faculty and so on. So I went to see them. And I was just fascinated by that. It was in a little dark room with narrow windows, and they were dancing, and the form of these women and so on, and the way they would dance and clearly demonstrate their form and so on. And I decided that I had to paint, the dance.
Okay.
But then I found that the other dancers or artists that I knew of who were established artists, who were painting, dancing, and so I didn't like how they were doing it. I like the Impressionist, Post-Impressionist, Degas, I like all his work. But I often wondered, could Degas have got these figures to move a little more, to lose that track? Mm-hmm. And so I found it looked as if it it was stuck images on a surface. So then I said, all these dances that I'm seeing all over the place in Africa and so on, I want to paint it differently. So that is what caught my attention. So every country that I went to, I wanted to meet with the artists. I started collecting African art and having a much better appreciation of African art. Looking at the African art, I immediately thought that I always had a suspicion Picasso must have seen the work of these guys. And eventually he admitted, and is now coming out a lot more and more in the literature. So that I also became influenced by the way in which you dissect, the human form and so on. Mm-hmm. The abstraction of it. Now, I am a representational artist. I seldom get involved in, non-objective expressionist kind of art and so on, but I would have some abstraction and so on. So even the African art or the sculpture influenced me significantly. and just did the things that people were doing around me, regularly.
Right. Because, that was actually one of my questions. The whole issue of dance movement, human interaction seems to feature very, very heavily in your work. How do you you seem to translate rhythm and conversation onto canvas.
Yes.
It's very, very prominent in your work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In all those global travels you had, can you share a story where your Trinidad and Tobagonian-ness made you stand out?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the second to last or third to last place that I worked with was in Sudan.
Uh-huh.
And I was supposed to be, I was stationed in Jamaica or Barbados for a little while, and then my office said, okay, we need somebody to go to Sudan. To go to Sudan, however, they have to send you particulars, you have to be cleared by the government, and so they say, okay, this person can come. And they said, I said, well, how much time do I have? They said, about a month, 3 months. Nothing, right? Cool, I said, no problem. Anyhow, 4 months, they got in touch. I didn't know really what was happening, but I am not too fussy. Anyhow, eventually I went to Sudan, and the minister that I was working with, we became quite friendly and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And one day, he embraced me, he hugged me up and he said, Mr. Trinidad and Tobago. So I said, oh, what is that about? And he told me, he said, when we got your particulars, they went looking for Trinidad and Tobago on a map. Because they were very, very particular. There are certain nationalities they would not accept.
Okay.
So they went looking for Trinidad and Tobago on a map. Couldn't find it. So they then sent back to my office to find out where is this Trinidad and Tobago. Eventually they located it. And that took some time, the correspondence back and forth. So they were very curious to find out, this Trinidad and Tobago, what it was like, that sort of thing. So I was always explaining, and as I said, we became good friends. And I always found the Sudanese very, very beautiful people, very warm people.
Yes.
And they were, of course, Shawel law. I believe it's still Shawel law at the time. So they would also, teach me about their culture and religion and so on and so on. But he was always fascinated by this Trinidad and Tobago that before that they had no clue.
Yeah, they could barely find it on the map.
They could barely find it on the map. So I really stood out as somebody that they didn't know much about the Caribbean as a matter.
Right.
And so they had to go and search for it. And I always wanted to find out, what it was like and that sort of thing.
Good. Of the many countries in which you've worked and painted, which has left the deepest mark on your art, and how so?
I would say Sudan, in terms of my own techniques. Because it was there that I really started. One, I had a lot of time, because I told you it was Sarello, and the guys told me, listen, don't mess around in this country, you go to work, go back home. So I had a lot of time, and they finished work earlier. They started very early, finished, something 2 o'clock or so, because it was very hot as well.
Okay.
And so I had a lot more time to paint. And that is when I started developing what I call the aggregate technique, using sand, Nile sand, and Sahara Desert sand as well. because it was a very fine textured sand that I would wash, and that would come from what was called the haboob, or a sandstorm, which they call a haboob. And once I had a haboob, the entire, gallery or porch area, something could have about an inch thick of this stuff, And I would wash that, and I found that it gave me a sort of a texture that I liked. Not even so much a paste, but I can then add additional sand actually to that, so that I can get a rough aggregate sort of technique. And I started experimenting with that quite a bit. So a lot of the paintings from that period, coming up to about, I think my exhibition, the last exhibition, about 2011.
Right.
All those paintings before that, I actually experimented with that technique a lot. I also used a lot of the African motifs in a lot of the paintings that I did. I haven't done any of that recently. But again, up to about, I would say, 2008, a lot of my paintings would have included, the African motifs, basically from the traditional art that I would have encountered there. So I would say, in terms of my own techniques, I started experimenting really in Sudan, and the themes, the subject matter really would have been, a lot of it would have been really motifs from the continent.
Okay.